Welcome to Every Step podcast. I'm Krystyna Weston.
And I'm Judith Beck.
Every Step is the podcast where career and life meet.
With a new guest every episode, we explore the gutsy issues affecting everyone in the workplace.
Today we are chatting with Vanessa Bennett, a specialist high-performance coach. We explore the challenges many of us face working remotely and how we can better manage our energy and that of our teams to avoid burnout. The new environment of working from home and working at work, this hybrid environment, is it working? Is it working in terms of productivity for teams? How is it playing out? What are you hearing from the organizations that you're coaching and the people that you're coaching?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I think the short answer to that is we're not 100% sure yet. So it's still very early on in terms of getting any sort of, robust research on all of this kind of thing. And I think the other thing as well is different people work differently. And so when we're doing work in the hybrid environment, and we're doing a lot of work helping people to redefine their high performance culture in a hybrid environment. So what we generally find is that there are definitely some wins out of hybrid. I think the old way of working, it was broken to a certain extent, but have we really fixed it? I don't know that we have. So when we think about hybrid, what we find is that it's often what's good for the individual is not necessarily matching up with what's good for the business. So it's really great to be able to be in a position where people have a little bit more flexibility in terms of time or where they're working, and that's definitely saving a lot of people energy, which is great.
And they don't have to commute. So they're saving time, which they can allocate in other ways, potentially.
Yeah, exactly. But the downside of that is sometimes what's working for them, that might make it hard for someone else that they're working with to do their job if they can't get them at a certain time or they're not sure what's going on or something like that. So it can actually create a lot of angst for other people that you're working with. And what we're finding is that, some of those situations were probably problematic even before the move to hybrid, but the move to hybrid has exacerbated it, because the other thing that we have as an issue in hybrid is that we have a lot more ambiguity. And so if we don't really kind of define our new way of working, then it's really, a lot of people are spending a lot of energy on stuff that we haven't had to before. So it might sound really silly, but things like, if someone turns their camera off, well, all of a sudden you've got 5 other people in a meeting going, not just trying to focus on the task at hand, but they're also having this back chatter in their brain.
Why has she turned or he's turned the camera off?
That's right. Where did she go? And then it's like, then they come back and it's like, oh, I just had a package get delivered. And then you get 5 people go, well, if we were in the office, would we be accepting packages?
That kind of behavior.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's kind of been, we haven't had a lot of redefinition of what's the acceptable norms of this yet. And so when you've got all that ambiguity, you've got all this back chatter, which is draining people's cognitive energy, or in our speak, energy credits. And I think that's a lot of that is still unresolved, and people are not realizing the impact of that on not just themselves, but on other people.
Yeah. We've been hearing a lot in the media around burnout, that everybody's, burnt out. Is that a factor of a lot of high achievers not being able to switch off and separate, or is working from home? I think about different personality types, and for some people working from home, they're very disciplined, they can switch off, they've got balance in their lives, they go for a run, they go for a walk, but others are just on the whole time and they don't know how to turn off. And that in itself is exhausting.
Yeah, exactly. So that's definitely one of the contributors to that. So if we take a step back and we think about what causes burnout, if you look at it from a very high level, burnout is generally caused for us office people, not for athletes and things like that, but for us office people, burnout is basically overspending your cognitive energy. That is really where that fatigue sets in.
Well, talk to us a little bit about that, because for some listeners that will be a new term. So I'd love you to kind of tease that out a little bit more and give us a sense of what that means from a practical perspective for people.
Yeah, absolutely, Krystyna. So think about mental energy. So it depends on where you're from, whether it's a psychology background. Some people call it emotional energy. Some people call it mental energy. I call it cognitive energy. I'm more of a neuroscience background. So think about your mental energy. It's that kind of feeling where you feel like you run a marathon, but you've barely left your desk. And it starts to manifest itself in physical fatigue. It starts to manifest itself in the inability to get excited about things that you would normally get excited about and be interested in. So there's all these kind of things that can happen. But generally speaking, people are not respecting that we have a certain amount of cognitive energy. And yes, you can replenish it. But the concept is most people are like, and we get that asked a lot. We say, oh, how do we get more cognitive energy? And the first thing is that we say to people is you need to stop spending so much of it unnecessarily. And when you don't know how you're spending it or what you're spending it on, it just goes and you don't even realize. So let's think about it. Back to the pandemic. Did anyone ever think that they would have to spend cognitive energy on where is my next roll of toilet paper coming from or homeschooling? Like, we just don't factor that into our energy credit budget, each day. And then all of a sudden we had to, and then we still tried to carry on like we did normally. And even if we don't have those other things to think about, then you get the issue of like, we're just on all the time. And that's probably a subset of that. Like that's,
and you're on in different parts of your life all the time, because pre-pandemic, you'd go to work, you'd go to the office, you would, as a parent or whatever, you still might not switch off, but you have the opportunity to potentially switch off. You immerse yourself in the work environment and you can switch off different parts of your life. But now with this collapsing for many people of home and work all in the same place, there is no off button. Your home and your life and your personal life and your animal life and your children life have all just, collapsed into one big pot, and we don't have that separation.
It's so true. And I think, like the issue with the mental energy is like your brain needs to be still. And when you think about when we actually go to work, and that might be part of a commute, you might have a walk as part of that commute, but you've still got some time where it's like you don't necessarily have to have constant stimulation. But if you're literally going from one meeting to the next and you've got sort of no wind down time because you're going to a meeting by literally just clicking one button and clicking another button, you don't have that walking. You might normally have to walk 10 minutes to another meeting. So all of these things are not happening where you would get those natural little breaks. And then
incidentals, of course, that kind of incidental stuff that happened.
Yeah. And then of course, you add in this exponentially increasing addiction to phones and devices and things like that, so that even if people are taking a walk, they're still like glued to their phones. And the brain just cannot handle that much constant stimulation and still function properly. There's just so much that it's going into overdrive. And then when you add in the hybrid environment, and now you're spending cognitive energy on why did that person switch their camera off? Is it okay that they go and drop their kids every day at work, whereas they wouldn't have done that before? Like all of these kind of things are just draining cognitive energy that we don't even realize, let alone the basics that we've always been talking about with our clients for many years pre-pandemic, around things like, we have about 4 hours a day of heavy cognitive energy available to us. And if we're trying to spend more than that, and that's not to say, we can still work very long days, but we need to make sure that it's an energy thing and where we only have 4 hours of heavy work to do. Once we have more than 4 hours of heavy cognitive energy work to do in a day, we're already overspending. And that's before you add on a pandemic and hybrid and whole new ways of working and getting on top of different technologies and all of this kind of thing. So a lot of the work that we've been doing on cognitive energy pre-pandemic, we've had to make sure that we go back to the basics of that, but then you add in everything that's been happening over the last 3 years, and it's just this cocktail ready for overspending cognitive energy and leading to burnout.
So I wonder about this productivity and I know working from home and the hybrid model, I would 100% agree with that, because you have to have flexibility. But I wonder about the actual productivity of companies and teams not being together and not learning. And I also think there's layers of differences from the point of view the younger generation in their 20s and 30s, how important is it for them to be in the office so they can learn from the older ones and they can ask questions that they need answers from. I mean, most of the things that we learn when we're early in our careers from listening to others and seeing them doing it. Well, if
we're missing out on that incidental learning.
I'm missing out on it. If I'm working from home, I'm not hearing it. What are people telling you, Vanessa, as far as your clients and teams and how that's affecting them and how they're trying to navigate it from a productivity point of view?
Yeah, we're seeing this a lot. We're seeing it, especially with junior staff, they're actually, a lot of them are quite keen to come in, and bizarrely enough, it's a lot of the senior staff who kind of go, well, I'm more productive at home and away we go. But there's a leadership issue there. It's not just about you. We need to make sure that we're leading other people effectively. And so, a big part of that is understanding the impact of you not being there and what impact does that have on other people. But yes, we are definitely finding that people are spending way more time in meetings because they're diarizing all of these check-ins because they can't just ask the person, or they can't just find out, or hear what's going on. And so more meetings therefore means that the less time that people actually have to do the work, the less time they have to do the work. Well, of course, more meetings they need to have because people are seeing that there's a bottleneck with workflow. And so that's one of the big issues that we're seeing that's draining the cognitive energy at the moment as well, is issues with workflow, and therefore things aren't being done on time, or people can't just get the things to kind of move it to the next person or to the next part of the process. And then what we're finding is that this is kind of creating this situation of last minute dumping on other people. You're expecting someone to get something to you by a certain time, they haven't gotten it to you, and therefore now you're in a pickle because you've got to get it to someone else and you've promised, and someone always comes with a very plausible excuse of, oh, well, I would have done that, but then this happened. And the issue is still, well, why is this the first time hearing about it? It's harder to communicate because if there's if you reach a snag or something like that and you've got people in the same office as you just go, hey, hit a bit of a snag, can we renegotiate that deadline? Whereas it takes more cognitive energy to communicate when you've hit snags, when you can't find the person, and then you've got to get on a meeting or send an email or something like that. And then because people are so tired and out of cognitive energy, they don't want to do the stuff that takes more cognitive energy, so it just falls by the wayside. And therefore, this accountability in actually delivering what you said you were going to do by the time you said you were going to do it by, I have to be honest, I always think that accountability is annoyingly low for most people. But what I find is that, at the moment, it is at an all-time embarrassing low for so many people. We've had to go back to basics on so many things around our accountability frameworks. What is an accountability mindset? What are the frameworks that we implement on a day-to-day basis to increase communication so that people are actually being accountable? And the problem is as well, people are not having any consequences for not being accountable because people are too tired and out of cognitive energy to have what would be perceived as a difficult conversation of having to hold someone to account.
We're avoiding those difficult conversations. I know in a sales context, what you're saying is spot on. What I'm observing is, and Judith and I have been having this conversation as well, is that there's no fast no. People are evasive. Because they're not having to meet you in the real world, and they don't actually know you in the real world. So, and there aren't any consequences. So they drag you along, and then drop you, and then you get ghosted. They just become invisible. So you're spot on around what's happened to manners. And again, as Judith said, I don't want to be old-fashioned. What's happened to basic manners? What's happened to, hey, I'm overloaded, can somebody help me right now? Or, hey, I can't do, being vulnerable, hello, I don't know how to do this, can somebody help me? Or actually, no, I don't have capacity. The word no, being able to say the word no. No, I don't have capacity for that right now. I could do it in 2 weeks' time, but not this week. what do you think's happened that we can't have, because manners are there, we all know what the manners are, but for whatever reason, is it because we're in this online world and it doesn't have consequences now, or
we become transactional? That's what it is.
What's going on? Because I'm noticing it in sales environments and all sorts of environments where, like you said, the manners have just gone out the window.
Yeah. But we become transactional. We're a transaction. Like if you're just meeting people via Zoom, it becomes a transaction. You don't really know that person that well, or that, so you don't have the same feeling and warmth and empathy. It's a transaction, and I can say no quickly. And the thing is, leadership is an issue because, Vanessa, you said it earlier. You know, a lot of the leaders, they're happy to work from home. They're in their, you know, late 30s, early 40s. They've got their contacts. They know their job inside out. This is great. I'm working from home. I've been there, done that. I've paid my dues, right? But as leaders of teams, what they don't realize is that there's a ton of people in their team who haven't and who don't know things. And so when they don't go into the office, even on a hybrid, because people tell me I haven't seen my boss in months, right? And when I do, why should I go into the office? Because my boss isn't there. So so when the leaders don't set the rules of engagement that everybody follows, then why are the younger ones going to do it?
We want to define the hybrid culture, because if it's not defined, it's a free-for-all and there's ambiguity, and people are spending all this cognitive energy on all the stuff that doesn't contribute to outcomes for the business. So we've got to get rid of that. All right. There's so much energy and productivity that's being lost with that. So if we help people to go in there and say, right, what are the outcomes that we need to do? So even for leaders, you know, as a leader, you need to make sure that your team knows exactly what's expected of them. Okay, well, how do we do that? All right. It's going to be done differently now in a hybrid environment, but how do we do that? So how do we make sure we're getting these outcomes? And, you know, and a hybrid is great. You know, there's actually a lot of things where there's a lot of advantages. I mean, you know, people complain about Zoom fatigue, which I find hilarious because Zoom is the least fatiguing platform. And when you understand the neuroscience of what's going on with Zoom fatigue, you can actually get around it very easily and very quickly. And I think, you know, imagine if this pandemic had have happened even 10 years ago, you know, let alone 20 years ago. You know,
we didn't have the technology. We just didn't have the technology.
Exactly. Our for professional services and financial services, you know, our careers basically would have been decimated. It would have been virtually impossible to do what we could. So we have a lot to be grateful for in terms of the flexibility that this has allowed us to do. What we need to make sure is that we still need to get outcomes for the business. So we need to remove ambiguity as much as possible. When I go in there and help people to define, to come up with their hybrid culture, I can't go in there and say, here's the perfect hybrid culture, because everyone's different, depends on the needs of the business. And even with teams within businesses are going to be different depending on the needs of the teams.
So what sorts of things are ambiguous? Because you've used that term a fair bit. What are the so clearly it's an issue in organizations. So what are the sorts of things that people are experiencing as ambiguous?
Yeah. So we would look at things like even just understanding how we conduct meetings in a hybrid environment. What is the new normal? Like, we didn't really need to have a dress code in our employment contracts. Many people do, but you know, we kind of knew how we dressed for the office. And then all of a sudden, we've got people dressing for meetings, everything from dressed up in their suits at home to, you know, tracky dacks, and we're not even sure if they have pants on at all, you know.
And doesn't really matter anyway. Yeah.
Well, exactly. Yeah. So, you know, so long as you look good from the chest up. But I think it's people were showing up and, you know, not even brushing their hair or switching their cameras off because they hadn't brushed their hair. And it's like, well, you're working, you know, and so we need to make sure that what is acceptable. Is it acceptable to turn your camera off? Is it acceptable to turn up in a certain thing, dressed in a certain way in a hybrid environment? Is it acceptable to get the package when Amazon calls? What's acceptable? Is it acceptable that we should be, you know, spending all this time with the kids during the day and then working when other people can't get hold of us at night? You know, there's flexibility for you, and then there's what is good for the business. And so all of this ambiguity of kind of like people are still not sure what is the right way to do this. So
and has the pendulum kind of gone to what's good for you, and it now needs to come back to what's good for the business?
Correct.
It kind of feels like it's gone too much to it's all about the individual.
Correct.
And that's a cultural, societal thing. I think that's a big topic that's resonating right across the world at the moment.
A little bit of entitlement.
It is. And and I'm not too worried about that, because that's going to self-correct beautifully with a nice little recession.
Yep.
So, we get unemployment going all the way up, and it'll start to, so I'm not too worried about that, but it'll kind of, come back to where it should be. But, it'll settle where the market kind of needs it to be. But I think it's a case of like, when we go in there, it's like we still need to make sure that we're very clear on, hey, we want you to understand how you work best as an individual, because you need to understand that so that you can do your best work. But make no mistake, when we come together to define our hybrid environment, you're not going to get everything that you want, because the business still needs to run. Because if the company is not functioning and not hitting its outcomes for clients, there won't be a job. It's that simple. So we need to bring
KPIs are still KPIs. I mean, we still have KPIs.
That's right, exactly. But I love the idea of making sure that we're very focused on outcomes, and that can be from a hard KPI like a sales figure or something like that, but also a KPI, well, we call them key culture indicators, which are your key BAM indicators, your behaviors, your activities, your mindset. And this is all the stuff that's kind of very much up in the air at the moment. So the way that we define our culture does need to be redefined, and it does need to be explicitly stated. So, otherwise you've got ambiguity of like someone says in a job interview, oh yes, I like to work flexibly, and the interviewer goes, yeah, we have flexible working here, and the interviewee's going, great, I'm going to be working from home 5 days because that's what flexible is to me. And then you've got the interviewer going, oh great, they can work from home 1 day a week because that's what flexible is to me. That's a perfect example of ambiguity. Yeah. All this stuff needs to be explicitly stated so that we're not spending any energy credits on, so what did they mean by flexible? It's like, talk about this stuff. And this all needs to be gotten out on the table, and then this then becomes how we roll around here. And some people are even incorporating, once we've done work together, they're incorporating this into their employment contracts and getting people to re-sign them. So this is how we roll around here in the new normal. Yes, we want the flexibility. Yes, we want the upside of being able to embrace this hybrid environment. But make no mistake, the business has outcomes that need to be met. And everyone just working exactly how they want to work with no regard for what impact that has on other people will not get those outcomes.
Is there still a tension in terms of what you're seeing between input versus output? I mean, as a leader, I've always been output focused. But I've worked for bosses who were input focused, where I had to be at the desk at 8:30. If I was even 1 minute late, there was somebody phoning me saying, where are you? And I was not allowed to leave my desk until 5:30 in the afternoon or whatever the time is. And I know there are still leaders out there that are very focused on input. You're there, you're present between these hours. Changing your mindset as a leader to rewarding output is actually a very big shift. Is it an issue, or is this just an old concept of input versus output?
It's definitely getting better. I'm like you, I've always been output focused, and I think that's probably because I'm also from a sales background. Like, output is very easy to measure in a sales environment. It's like you've got one number and 12 months, sort that
numbers
out.
Don't lie.
Yeah, numbers don't lie.
Numbers don't lie.
So I think that's very easy. And in fairness, I mean, like, salespeople have not been working from an office 9 to 5, forever. That's just not the job. So So I think there's a certain amount of that where it's easier to measure the output. I think what's happened is in jobs where it's less easy to measure the output, people have gone into the default mode of, well, maybe I just measure the input instead because that's kind of what I know, and it's taking less cognitive energy for me to do that. So that's not a great sort of situation to fall into, but I can neuroscientifically see why that has happened. I think we definitely need to get really clear on what are the outcomes, what's the output that people need to do, and have that flexibility around doing that. But it's also, I mean, you've got flexibility in terms of time. You've also got flexibility in terms of location. So, we often think about the flexibility of location, but we kind of forget the flexibility of time. And I think so long as, again, it depends on the role, but if people understand when they can get you. I've always been a big believer in just kind of, seeing life as its entirety. I've been in situations where I teach classes at the gym part-time, I always have. And, I might be on a plane in work hours learning my choreography, but then I'll do emails at night because it's easier than doing emails on a plane. So it's like, just get it done. That's kind of the main thing. And so I think there needs to be definitely a lot more flexibility around that, but you can only do that when people are really clear on what needs to be done and by when. And then also having these, the problem that we're seeing now is that people are saying yes, that they can do stuff because that takes less cognitive energy than saying, actually, no, I can't do that by that particular time. Or they're so overwhelmed, they actually have no concept of whether or not they can do it. So they just say yes. And that's the quickest way to get someone out of their face right at that particular point in time, which,
people pleasing is easier.
Yeah, that's right. It's easier to say yes and then worry about the consequences later. And in fairness, there haven't been a lot of consequences. People are like, oh no, I'm not keen to push people at the moment. And I understand that, people are going through a hard time. And, I kind of get that for a certain amount of time, but how long are we planning to pull that card for?
Are we treading on eggshells with our people? Are we treading on eggshells? And how do we handle that delicately? Because there are some people that are genuinely being challenged by the new environment. And how do we know the difference? And how do we manage that in a way that's good for the person and good for the business?
It's open and direct communication. It's making sure that the business has psychological safety to talk about those things, and then making sure that people are providing support for that. So, I mean, just as an example at the moment, we're seeing a lot of people, oh, I'm really tired. It's my boss's fault. Well, that's not very accountable. But then I look at it and say, well, has the boss provided the environment where the person has psychological safety to push back and say, actually, no, I can't get that done, in which case, that's a leadership issue. But if the boss has said that, and then this person is and is still struggling for various reasons, well, let's talk about those so that we can get the person some help with that. And there's so many ways that we can help people. Like, we're brought in to do things like that as well. We're coaching a lot of people to help them through if they've got really stressful jobs and they've got lots of stuff going on around the outside as well. Helping them to manage the whole thing in its entirety is a really important thing that you need to really be seen to be providing to your team. Once you're providing that, though, we also need to make sure that the employees are taking the responsibility to implement those kind of things and to take this on as well. So it is very much a two-way street, but we do need to talk about it, work out where the blocks are. Any good leader will be really focused on outcomes so that people are clear on what they should be doing. Once they get that clarity of what they should be doing, any roadblocks, let's have a great dialogue and communication to talk about that, regardless of what the roadblock is, and let's get the support in place to help people to do that. So it is a two-way street on that. If you remove ambiguity, if you are super clear about what's expected, if you're super clear about the culture and how we do things around here, if you are super clear about all of that, all right, we don't have to spend cognitive energy on those kind of things, okay? And it also means that you're going to have less difficult conversations. The only time we ever have a difficult conversation is because there was a mismatch of expectations. That's it. So if we get better as leaders at reducing the mismatch of expectations, then we should actually not really be having conversations that are difficult. They're just a conversation. Hang on, I thought we agreed that this was going to be done by then and it's not. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, and reducing the ambiguity plays really into that.
It's massive. It's massive. So ambiguity is a really, really evil thing as far as burnout goes, and people not understanding what's expected of them. So we have to do everything that we can as leaders to remove the ambiguity. Get rid of that, and half your job's done. If you have more ambiguity, you're going to have more difficult conversations that arise. People don't want to have difficult conversations. So pushing it back to your team to say, hey, can you get this done by then? If not, tell me when, all right? You tell me when you can comfortably get it done by. You tell me if there are roadblocks. So if we provide that psychological safety for people to push back, to disagree and ask, I mean, disagreement also comes down to things like, how do we do this easier? I like to do things as lazy as possible. You know, what's the outcome? And then how do we do it with the least amount of input required? So we want to have great conversations around how do we do things, not just the way that it's been done, but how do we do it better and how do we do it easier? And when you've got this idea of people can disagree safely, then you don't have difficult conversations anymore. Difficult conversations take cognitive energy, and they only happen because of a mismatch of expectations. So reduce the mismatch of expectations, save your cognitive energy, life's a whole lot easier.
So if you were, can you believe it? We're getting to our time because we can talk.
No kidding.
We can talk. There's no doubt about it. But if you were advising a young person today coming into the work environment for the first time, what would be like a couple things that you would say to them about how to be efficient and manage their ambitions in the work environment today? Vanessa, I'll start off with you.
Yeah, first thing, energy is your currency. Take it and own it as a responsibility, because in my perfect world, energy should be a KPI for people. So it's only a matter of time before, that things like that will start to permeate people. If you maximize your energy, then you are in a position to think better. You will get better mental health as a result of that. It's all of these kind of things that flow through that will set you in good stead. So firstly, do whatever you need to do to learn about cognitive energy and maximize cognitive energy for yourself, and take that as a very key responsibility for you. And then also say just, your career is your responsibility and nobody else's. So it's lovely if leaders, we often think that our leaders should be able to read our minds. Let's not confuse leadership with telepathy, right? So if you need something, then, and if you want certain training on something, speak up. If you are given too much work to do, then speak up by explaining that, hang on, this is going to take this amount of time and I've got this amount of time available to do it. So people would rather know that. And if you feel like you're in a situation where the leader's not promoting that and not allowing you to do that, then leave and go and find a leader who will. But your career and your energy is your responsibility, and never, ever forget that.
Fantastic. Krystyna, what would you advise?
What I would advise, I'd be echoing exactly Vanessa's words, and I'd add to that by invest in learning about yourself and do the internal work. Don't shy, because that's where you're going to build the skills to say no. That's where you're going to build the skills to speak up. So do the work on yourself and build your emotional capability and your communication skills around that, balanced obviously with the things that Vanessa was saying around getting that balance. Understand your energy, and understand that balance means also take time out, recognizing yourself when you're at breaking point, and don't feel guilty about taking time out. You need to take that time out. You can't be running at 100 kilometers an hour or 1,000 kilometers an hour the whole time. It's about knowing your own rhythms, but it's fundamentally about understanding yourself first.
That's absolutely right. What I would add to that is that basically you're coming in new. So it's always hard before it's easy. at the end of the day. So it might take you a little bit longer to get things. And because you are working in a remote environment these days, it will be essential for you to get mentors. You need to start getting mentors day one, because your boss will not be in your home office. Your boss won't be there like they would have been in the past. So you need people to talk to who are more experienced than you are. You need to make sure that you spend time and energy in your self-development and your skill development as well. If you don't know something, speak up. Communication is the key. Again, like Vanessa said, managers are not mind readers, and it's better to ask what you think is a stupid question than to make a stupid mistake. So nobody will ever think questions are stupid. That would be my advice to you as an entry person. But mentors, and not just one, several. And that would be my main thing that I would say to people coming in. And we are out of time. Vanessa, oh my God, thank you. You know, we have to have you back.
For more information about Every Step and our guests, head to everysteppodcast.com. To be notified of new podcasts, please subscribe via your favourite listening platform. And of course, follow us on social media and direct message us to share your ideas about guests or topics.